Welcome to the Chapter 3 podcast on water and fitness in the environment. We're talking about water now because water is this wonderful miracle molecule that makes all life as we know it possible. It's the reason why Earth has such a diversity of life, and it's the reason why in our space explorations we're constantly looking for evidence of water on other planets, because it has that potential for life, because all life as we know it relies on water. So if we can find it in other places, or at least traces of it, then there's also that potential for life in those places. We're on this constant quest to figure out if your Earth is really unique in the universe, or if there are other worlds out there which may have similar life forms or support life in some way, shape, or form. So let's take a closer look at water, because all of these properties that we're about to talk about, everything about water that makes life possible, all comes down to the simple fact of how the water molecules put together. The shape and the arrangement of the electrons makes life possible. So, the miracle molecule. What's up with water? Well, water contributes to the fitness of the environment. It's what makes life possible. And if we think about it, all of water's properties, all of its ability to make life possible, all comes down to the fact that water is a polar molecule. Okay? Life on Earth probably evolved in the water. That's where our earliest evidence is, in those stromatolites. Also, about 70% to 95% of all living cells are composed of water. So this is the composition in living cells. This is primarily for a few reasons. One, because the water is able to dissolve so many other substances because it's such an excellent solvent. In fact, it's called the universal solvent. The other reason is, especially for multicellular eukaryotic organisms like mammals who need to regulate body temperature, or others who just are what we call ectotherms, who have the same temperature as their environment, water has a very high specific heat due to its polarity, and that helps regulate body temperature. And in nature, water is one of the few substances that exists in all three states naturally. So solid, liquid, and gas. So here's the key concept to understanding this whole chapter, is that water's properties, its emergent properties, are because of its structure and interactions with other molecules. Okay? Primarily because the bonds formed in water are polar covalent bonds. And these polar covalent bonds are within the water molecule. This is important because a different kind of bond exists between water molecules. If we recall from previous study, polarity is due to an unequal sharing of the electrons. So in this case, oxygen, depicted here in red, is really, really electronegative. So it has a high electronegativity. And the hydrogen atoms on either end have a very low electronegativity. Or they're what we call electropositive. They don't have as strong a pull on the electrons. So because of this, there's an unequal sharing of electrons within the water molecule. And this unequal sharing of electrons, meaning that the oxygen is pulling on those electrons more than the hydrogen, means that the oxygen end of the molecule is slightly negative. It has a negative partial charge, and that's depicted by the symbol here. The hydrogen end, on the other hand, has a slightly positive charge depicted here. And we know that opposites attract. So this weak form of this weak form of ionic bond that's formed here is called a hydrogen bond, because it forms between hydrogen and another very electronegative end of another molecule. So let's take a look at the polarity of water molecules and how that really works with hydrogen bonding. So this whole polarity is due to the fact that when water bonds, it has this asymmetrical bonding, right? It's an asymmetrical bonding. The water molecule has a bent shape to it. Okay? Remember, there are two other lone pairs of electrons out here, which is why it's not a linear molecule, because those lone pairs of electrons do require some space and do take up real physical space. So because of its bent shape and because of that fact that the oxygen is more electronegative, the electrons are unequally distributed at this end of the molecule. Well, at the hydrogen end, we have that slightly partial positive charge. So because of that, hydrogen bonding is possible. So hydrogen bonding leads to a variety of different physical properties that we see in water. Some of the most notable, here you see surface tension. And this allows this water strider to walk on top of the water. Surface tension is a direct result of another property of water called cohesion. And cohesion is the ability of water to stick to itself. Okay? It likes to stick to itself, and because of that, it's forming its hydrogen bonds. Water can, in fact, form 4 hydrogen bonds at a time with other water molecules. And this creates almost a lattice effect, okay, in the water. In terms of surface tension, it's important for lots of insects that walk on top of the water, but it's also why when water is put on a surface it's not attracted to, it gets that nice round shape, or raindrops are round, because it's maximizing the surface tension and maximizing those hydrogen bonds. Along with cohesion, water sticks to other things as well, and that's the property of adhesion. Think of tape being an adhesive, so water sticking to other things is because of adhesion. And if you can imagine, water sticks to itself because of the positive and negative charges. So if it's sticking to something else, there has to be another thing attracting it. And that, again, is because water is attracted to other polar substances, so things that have a partial charge, and other charged substances like ions and any other charged substance. Water sticks to glass for this reason, because glass has a slightly negative charge. We're also going to talk a little bit about heat capacity and water's high specific heat and its ability to help regulate temperature. But first, let's take a look at cohesion and adhesion. So organisms are depending on the cohesion of water molecules. One of the best examples of this is this process of transpiration, which is occurring in plants. Transpiration is this movement of water from the soil all the way up through a plant's roots, through the stem or the trunk of a tree, and out its leaves. This whole process is a process known as transpiration. But we have to move water that high. Now, we couldn't move water nearly as high as we could without the properties of cohesion and adhesion. So, if you imagine all these water molecules in the soil, okay, each of the water molecules in the soil is attracted to other water molecules. That's that process of cohesion, water being attracted to water. And water is also attracted to the cell walls and to these different cells in the plant itself. And that would be the property of adhesion. So if we take a look right here, we can see the hydrogen bonds between water molecules forming almost like a chain. I like to think of this as a bunch of mountain climbers, right? They're scaling a cliff, but they're hooked on to the person behind them and they're hooked on to the person ahead of them. That's like the water molecules who are attached to one another. Okay, so if we're scaling a cliff and we have a rope that's connecting us to the next person in our line, here's my little, okay, this here would be cohesion. Now, just like mountain climbers couldn't just climb a mountain in a vacuum in space, nor can water move up this plant in a vacuum in space. These mountain climbers are also attached to the rock face. Right? They're also holding on here. They're anchored here as they go. And that, because we're anchoring different things, would be adhesion. Okay? They're anchored onto something else. Just like here, you can see these hydrogen bonds between the water molecule to the sides, to the vessels, to the different xylem and phloem tissue vessels of the plant. So this serves to slowly start to move water up. But there has to be a force pulling, and that's the force of evaporation. So in our leaves back here, if we're coming back to our tree, in each of these leaves there are tiny openings for gas exchange to occur. Because remember, the primary function of this leaf is for photosynthesis. In order for photosynthesis to occur, we have to take carbon dioxide in, CO2 has to come in, and O2 has to leave. Depending on the temperature and how humid the air is outside, there's another thing that's leaving, and that's water vapor. Water vapor is also escaping out of these stomata, these openings inside the leaf. Those openings are stomata. And as that water vapor escapes out, it's going to pull on its closest water molecule to come with it. So that process is now slowly pulling each of these water molecules up and out of the leaves, and that in effect pulls the water up from the soil into the plant's tissues. Okay? The way it's able to fight gravity is because it's not only is it pulling on the molecule ahead of it, but it's also anchored to those veins of the plant, to those plant tissues which have a charge, so that it can move and continuously go up that plant. Water also has a really high heat capacity. In that it has a high specific heat. If you recall from physical science, specific heat is the amount of energy needed to raise 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. Okay, so water has a very high specific heat, which means that it requires a tremendous amount of energy to heat up. You can see that here. This is part of the reason that coastal areas stay so much more mild in their climate than interior regions of a landmass. If we look over here at this diagram, we can see that these average temperatures along the coast, 75, 72, 73, it's pretty mild. And as you move farther inland, okay, the temperatures steadily increase. Major reason for that is that the ocean regulates the world's climates. Okay? The oceans regulate world climate. They're big conveyor belts moving heat around the planet, soaking it up at the equator and then moving it towards the poles into cooler regions. Because water can absorb so much energy before changing in temperature, it's taking in all this energy from the sun, and then it also slowly releases it. So it doesn't only take a lot of energy to warm water up, water holds on to that heat and very slowly releases it back. And this is why the coastal areas are cooler in the summer, because all that solar energy is being soaked into the oceans, which is rising in temperature slowly. And then those coastal areas also stay more mild in the winter months because the ocean is slowly releasing that heat back to land. This is also important in terms of your body. When you get hot, you sweat. Your body is secreting moisture and then allowing and forcing the heat from your body tissues into that sweat. Okay? This is called evaporative cooling. The idea that we're accumulating moisture on the exterior of the body, and that moisture, that water, is then absorbing the excess heat from the body. When those molecules absorb enough heat, we know that as molecules heat up, they start vibrating faster. When they vibrate fast enough, they can break free of the other hydrogen bonds and their surrounding molecules holding them in place, and they evaporate, they move off the skin. And as they evaporate, they're taking that high energy with them, cooling the rest of the body. So this is really important for a lot of different organisms to maintain a proper body temperature, maintain that homeostasis.